On this edition of ITG, Steve Slaton goes into the College Football Hall of Fame and more portal moving and shaking and coaching staff updates to discuss as well. All of that and more on this edition of In the Gun.
You are now watching Believe.
ITG.
With Wes, Owen, and Jed.
Single.
I've got the best teammates in the business here, all right?
No way.
They both played the game. They both know the game. Owen is the runaway beer truck known for having some fun.
Owen Schmidt, you have a podcast, In the Gun.
Owen Schmidt, like a runaway beer truck down the sidelines.
Jed is the signal caller who is the X's and O's and the brainiac. So we've combined those two skill sets.
Skills I've acquired over a very long career.
You are In the Gun.
Once you enter this family, there's no getting out.
In the Gun, episode 226 of your new favorite WVU football podcast. I'm Wes Schuler. I've got the best teammates in the business. We got the beer truck, Big O. We've got the signal caller, Jed Drenning. And as always, brought to you in part by our friends at Bet Online. The game starts here. And we have got a fun topic. We have got some fun breaking news for you here as the National Football Foundation and the College Football Hall of Fame has announced that former WVU running back Steve Slaton is a member of the 2025 College Football Hall of Fame class. Steve will become the seventh WVU football player inducted into the College Football Hall of Fame. Now, he's going to have to wait a while for it to be official because the ceremony isn't until December. I mean, they're announcing this thing way ahead of time. When I saw that on the press release, I was like, wait a second, hold on. I had to double check that. I was like, next December? Like they got to wait 11 months. They do have to wait 11 months. And it's a hell of a Hall of Fame class. We'll get into all of that as we roll along here. But Big O, I'm going to obviously go to you first on this one. Your former teammate, your former running mate, your partner in crime there, Steve Slaton going into the College Football Hall of Fame. Pretty stinking cool.
Man, what an absolute honor. That should definitely, if there were any doubts, which I know there's not for Steve, just a testament to the hard work and determination that he overcame, right? And the years of running that ball, man. I mean, think of his story, kind of, having a shot at Maryland with the, getting that scholarship pulled, having a Cinderella career at West Virginia, going on to play multiple years in the NFL. Football has been very, very good to him, and now you're starting to see some of the accolades from that hard work. So I'm super pumped for him, and this whole class, man, what a stocked class. So very awesome to be a part of that class as well. Jed, what do you think?
It hasn't gone to his head. Right. And we'll say that about Steve, because the first thing I was thinking is I reached out to you and I was like, man, we got to get Steve back on the show. Of course, he's a friend of the program. Steve was on with Pat for our 150th episode. We brought you guys back together for the first time from a media standpoint. So I thought maybe we can get, Steve to pop in here and give his initial reaction to this incredible news. And he's with his son. So he's busy with his kid tonight. So his priorities are in the right place, right? So he will be. We're trying to work something out. He will soon be on the show. Come back and visit us to talk about it. You guys can tell some war stories. But I'm sitting here thinking and I've always thought this. He did all this, 3,923 yards, 805 yards receiving, 55 touchdowns, 50 rushing touchdowns in 3 years. Can you imagine if he would have come back for that fourth year? I mean, he would have put up numbers to the moon that nobody would ever touch, right? So, and I do have to ask, Big O, 3,923 yards. How many of those do you take credit for?
Well, we ran that zone scheme, so I give credit to mostly the line and him, really.
It's pretty remarkable. It is.
It really is. Consider the numbers that he put up in 3 years, considering he had to wait his time a little bit his freshman season as well, too. Yep. He didn't burst on the scene right away. He wasn't the lone feature back right away his freshman year. It's crazy impressive. I think well over 800 receiving yards in there in those 3 years, pardon me, as well, too. And we did mention the class in general. I did want to touch on that in just a second. It's going to be a fun group. It's an incredible group of names from a player standpoint. Steve Slaton, Mike Vick, Michael Strahan, Haloti Nada, Alex Mack, Jim Kleinsasser. You've got Graham Harrell, former offensive coordinator at WVU. Monty Ball, an outstanding running back from Wisconsin. There are some huge names there. Michael Huff is in this class, defensive back from Texas who won a national championship there with Vince Young and had a really nice NFL career as well, too. Not to include Urban Meyer, Nick Saban on the coach's side of things as well. There's just some absolutely insane names there all around. This is an incredible class.
Yeah, I'm going to be excited. I'm sure he's looking forward to waiting those 10, 11 months to get there.
Now, you talked to us about part of his story being that kind of disjointed start. It took him a little bit to settle in, right, Owen? It was supposed to be all the hype and all the hubbub was about Jason Gwaltney. Before there was Noel Devine, there was Jason Gwaltney, the 5-star stud that was supposed to be the next coming, right? So Steve finds himself took a much different path to get here than what Jason Gwaltney did. And Jason Gwaltney is a guy, I remember the story. He was being recruited by USC. Pete Carroll called him from the locker room as they were celebrating the national championship. He was a hyped kid. So it was a coup for us to land him. And when you think about the start to that 2005 season for Steve Slaton, I went back and I revisited some of that today. Syracuse in the season opener, he didn't have a carry. The second week, Wofford, he had 8 carries, 42 yards. Didn't have a carry against Maryland, didn't have a carry against East Carolina. And you were starting to settle in. By the Maryland game, you were getting some totes and you were chugging along and being productive, right? Again, Jason Gwaltney had those carries in the Maryland game. That's what I think of when I think of that Maryland game down at College Park. East Carolina, he didn't have a carry. Now, we all think of Louisville as his coming out party. That's when he really established himself and announced himself to the world. Well, I think a big part of that is because of the 6 touchdowns against Louisville. Because to be honest with you, I don't think it was as big an announcement. Oh, and you tell me, the 2 games leading up to Louisville, I think internally within the building, you already saw something coming. He had the Virginia Tech game, which was, of course, we fell way behind and just were playing catch up the whole game. But one of the few bright spots in that loss to the Hokies, Steve had 11 carries for 90 yards. And then the following week, Rutgers, 25 carries for 139 yards. 25 for 139 the week before the Louisville game. So, Owen, talk to us about that. Everybody likes the Louisville game. It's almost like he didn't touch the football until the Louisville game, and here he comes out of nowhere. That's not entirely accurate. What was going on in practice between those 2 productive games he had leading up to Louisville?
Well, you saw the change in snaps. I think there was some off the field stuff with Jason. That was why there was a small change up. Not discrediting, either party, but I think that's what happened. And then the PTs just started getting transferred over to Steve, and you saw him start to take touches, and then it just exploded. I want to say, Pat and Steve kind of that Louisville game, that was
the injury to Bednarik.
It was it was an absolute instant classic. And you kind of saw the ramp up, right? The game before with Rutgers, but heavy carries, heavy attempts, 25 attempts for a running back. In my opinion, that's quite a workload.
That's crazy. How many West Virginia fans, you guys, I'm going to ask you, because you're both dialed in, what percentage of West Virginia fans would know that the week before the Louisville game, Steve Slaton carried 25 times for 139 yards? The week before the Louisville. What percentage of West Virginia fans remember that?
Not many. I remember. I remember that he had started to get some attention. Like, it wasn't just like, who's this guy at the Louisville game coming out of absolutely nowhere like it was with Pat White. But I didn't know it was 25 carries for over 100, for triple digits for 100 Bills the week before against Rutgers. So I did not know it was to that extent, no.
You want to hear down the stretch? Oh, and you're talking about those 25 totes being a load. You're exactly right. Now, by the time we played Cincinnati, Here are his last 4 games of that season: 25 carries against Cincinnati, 34 against Pitt, 28 against South Florida, 26 in the Sugar Bowl against Georgia. So that final month, oh boy, he was really carrying part of that load. That's a lot of blocking
Absolutely.
on your part. That's a
Oh,
lot of blocking on your part.
absolutely. And we were changing things up. I mean, semantically, as far as like what they were doing in the backfield. I went back and I watched a couple old films because I never really watched the game copies, right? I always watched the cut up. So it was kind of like literally like last 2 weeks, I've just been like cutting up, watching YouTube,
What'd you
like
see?
the old cuts. And it was funny to see us running out of the eye a lot that season, that 2005 season. We did a lot of eye stuff. Instead of our like, I felt like more like when we got to my senior year, we were in the Rip Max look
Well, you
almost.
were playing some tight end your senior year, yeah. So
Yeah, yeah.
good to get
So
both of you on the field. But yeah, think about some of his highlights. The touchdown to start the game in the Sugar Bowl against Georgia, that was out of the eye, right? Your big run. We always talk about it. Your big run in the Fiesta Bowl, your runaway
yep,
beer truck moment. That was out of the eye,
yep.
right? So you're
Old
right. We were
classic
running a
jelly
lot of
play.
eye
Yeah,
football. Yeah. Now
yeah.
let me ask you, when we used to call and Rich to some extent was still doing it with you guys, and probably I don't know. I think he still does today. Rip and Liz Max was two back, split back in the gun. Did you call that Rip and Liz eye when you guys went in the eye, or did you have a different name for it? We used to call it Rip and Liz eye.
I can't remember what we were calling it at that point.
Okay.
I think we were just calling it. I think just straight. I know we were getting into king and queen looks. I know that was a big thing for a while, like when I first got there, just where you'd offset like either strong or weak side. But
Yeah.
I don't know if it was Liz Max Eye. It might have been just
Not
because
Max. Just we go Rip eye,
Rip
Liz
Max Eye.
eye, or Rip
Yeah,
Max, Liz
it
Max.
might
Yeah.
have been that. Just honestly, I'm really drawing a blank. I can't remember at
Here's
all
why
what
I'm
we called it.
curious.
I
When
look.
Rich left, go ahead.
Yeah. No, go.
I was gonna say when Rich left Glenville and paired up with Tommy at Tulane and at Clemson, what he did was there were some elements of the old Florida State multiple I, which Bobby ran formationally and otherwise. There were a couple of them sprinkled into what Rich was doing, and they would call their pro I R and L. Of course, everything was set. You had a tight tackle, a tight guard, a split guard. We didn't go to that extent, but I think at some point Rich started calling his pro sets, his pro I, and his strong right and strong left R and L like the old FSU teams did, but I don't remember how much influence there was from that FSU side of things into what he was doing from a call standpoint. So it's always intriguing to hear me. It's like you and I could probably go into a meeting right now, and here's what I always tell people: it's the same language
Yeah,
that we were speaking 30 years ago. But what happens is they've introduced a bunch of new words into the language we don't
yeah,
know. We know the
yeah.
language, but we get tripped up with a few of the new words, right?
Yep.
It's yeah, the basis of the communication is going to be the same, but that's the part that always makes it interesting to have these conversations. So when you're thinking back to that '05 season, Steve's freshman season, how much max were we running then? Like split backs out of the gun.
I feel like we were running some, but it was really between that set and then the I set.
Yeah,
But we were running a lot of I. It just seemed like in the game footage, we ran a lot of I.
yeah. Yeah, well, that's good stuff right there. But and for those of you wondering, oh, looky here, we got a guest.
We
We've
got
got
the
a
next
guest.
we got the next WVU College Football Hall of Famer, the little beer truck checking in
We got the milk truck.
if you're
We got the
watching
milk
on
truck
Don't
on
let
there.
YouTube.
Yeah.
shine on your forehead.
What's he got?
Oh
Hey,
yeah.
we went hard sledding this weekend, dude.
Oh
Oh,
boy.
that's the only way. Look, you getting right in the camera. Hey
Yeah.
man, chicks dig scars. Just remember, all right.
Offense will remember you forever. Offense will remember you forever. Now, for those of you wondering, this always comes up every time a Hall of Fame conversation comes up. Okay.
Why is Pat White not in?
What about Pat? What about Pat? You got to remember, okay? There's criteria that has to be satisfied. And the way they look at it, first of all, you have to be at least 10 seasons removed from your final college game, which is why you see this cluster of guys from like '05 to 2010. You know what I mean? It's not it's somewhat by design that you have all these kids from kind of the same era being inducted at the same time because you do have to be at least 10 years out. But one of the other things with the criteria is you have to have earned All-American recognition from an NCAA sanctioned selector. In other words, one of the teams, first team All-American that the NCAA recognizes for this as part of that criteria. And look, you could have 26 records, be the leader in 10 key categories, but if you weren't first team on one of these, recognized All-American teams, you're never going to be in the College Football Hall of
Which is
Fame,
crazy.
which I think is kind of strange. It's they got to do something. It's kind of, I get it. How can you be one of the greatest all time if you weren't the single greatest that season? I understand. But at the same time, there's some record holders and some difference makers that revolutionize
And
the
I don't,
game.
and
I think that
yeah,
should almost be a
I
category.
agree. And
right?
Jed, that to me would make more sense if it's the NFL and okay, there's 32 starting quarterbacks in the NFL, and you got There's how many hundred something starting quarterbacks in college football every year?
Yes.
You're telling me only the first team guy is great? Like, come on.
I mean, I like the idea, Wes, of if there was a revolutionize the game category or something like that, and maybe it's one of those things. We lost the milk truck. One of those things that every year you don't have one. It's just every handful of years when somebody's worthy. Hey, Pat White got in here and started running zone read. The next thing you know, in this system, in this power spread, we'd never seen anything like it. And it became the mainstream of college football in large measure because of what Steve Slaton and Pat White and Owen Schmidt were doing at West Virginia. Well, Pat White was a critical part of that, right?
Yeah.
So I think that's part of the that discussion should lend itself. Hey, did you revolutionize the game? If so, we might have a little carve out for you, even though you weren't technically a first team All American. If you change, because how many first team All Americans don't change the game? Most of them, right? So Pat White, here we are having a Pat White conversation when it's Steve's moment in the sun. But at the same time, I think it's worthy. And you know what? Maybe even for the same reason, that's why there could be an Owen Schmidt conversation as a main cog in what we were, that kind of thing. I mean, that's my only complaint. But this is Steve's moment. This is Steve's shining time, and he earned every daggone second of it. I mean, just productive as productive gets. And I mean, it just you just got the sense in watching him once he got humming. I can't imagine what it would have been as he's flashing by you and you're trying to seal somebody off on him, because if you're just watching him from the outside looking in, he just had that it that you're like, he's gone. Oh, no, he's not. 2-yard gain. He's gone. I mean, every time he touched the ball, like he carried the ball 34 times, I just said on November 24th, 2005 against Pitt. I'll promise you 34 times I thought he was gone. Right. Now, he obviously wasn't, but it felt like that. He was just one of those guys that felt like
carries.
that.
That's
insane. Yeah.
He was really good at being patient. If you kind of watched a lot of his film, he was good at really being patient through the zone, and his burst was so quick that he could hit the second level right when he turned it on. And that's why I think so many of those runs popped, because he would see the crease and just take off. And he had that just absolute elite speed to get to the second level. And then once he got there, Coach McGee really preached, be an athlete, make the man miss. We're going to leave you one. All right. You go make it special. And I think that's why he really stood out to me as far as an elite, college zone runner. I mean, he was just so shifty. He was very patient, and and worked his tail off, dude. Worked his tail off in the weight room. You could definitely see Steve wasn't per se like the most vocal guy in the world, but you could see as the game went on, like he just kept juicing up. You know what I mean? He just kept juicing up. He just got better as it went. So congrats again, brother. Yeah, an absolute honor, and glad I got to play with the guy, man. I mean, it's a part of history I can tell my kids and my grandkids now.
He always struck me, Owen, as a guy that he ran the football from the running back position like he was returning kicks. And what I mean by that is he was incredibly decisive, as great kick returners have to be. He would commit to that one move. He wasn't a east west 2 and 3 moves guy. He would commit to that one move and then go like a great kick returner who sees daylight. And so what I want to ask you, how often, what was his hit and miss rate? And when you were blocking for him, it's all a game of angles and leverage. So as you're approaching a defender that you're trying to neutralize and take out of the equation and block, well, part of the angle you're going to push that defender is based on the angle the defender's taken. So you might approach him thinking, hey, I'm going to nudge him to the left, but he over pursues and you got to nudge him to the right. How often did you nudge him one way and think, all right, now I helped Steve out. If he goes to my left, he's in good shape. How often was it? 95% of the time he went the way you thought after a block, or was it less than that? Or what it felt like it was almost always. He was following what you did and what you set on the table, he would grab it and go.
Yeah, he definitely, in my opinion, made my job a lot easier because I feel like most defenders never would really sit on him for the cutback. They would always over pursue and they always track him. So I would always let the defender go where he wanted to. I never was a guy who was like, okay, I'm going to try to reach him this time. Now,
Just
sometimes
escorting. Yeah.
I would bang a reach play up because even if it wasn't a bounce play, I would do a bounce read because I could help the tackle get hooked, right, by chipping him inside, and my guy would be lost inside, right, because defense would get smarter. They'd have those guys going outside stunts, and then those backers would be filling in the gaps.
You
So
get caught up in the mix. Yeah.
yeah, so a lot of times they would get caught up in the mix, or honestly, just the over pursuit angles, and then I would just have to be decisive um, on letting that guy's momentum take him kind of where he wanted to go. There were times for downhill, but if anybody knows anything about angles in football, it's hard to blow a guy up going sideways. Like, and what I mean is like vertically down the
Yeah. Yeah.
field.
Yeah. You're
You know what
more
I'm
you're
saying?
more escorting them than hitting them.
Yeah,
Okay.
so a lot of the times you try to use their momentum against them and maybe like aim at the outside shoulder and really, feel where Steve was. I could always kind of watch a linebacker's eyes because he would be looking at me, but he'd be looking through me to see where the ball carrier was. So I would really kind of focus on that. And then you just got to make sure you win and get under the chin. You get under the
That makes
chin,
sense.
it's over.
That makes sense. My final question to you about this, and then we'll move on. How many times pre-snap, almost by alignment? Let's think in terms of, we always talk about outside zone and stretch play. That's what that was your bread and butter. Uh, and we've said a million times on this podcast, those who listen to the podcast are probably clinicking themselves by now. The three choices a running back has when you're running the outside zone, the stretch play. You can bounce it outside, take the edge, and just scream outside and get loose with it. You can bang it up between all the mix of what's playing out, or you can bend it back inside and do what Owen's talking about, take advantage of the over pursuit of the defense and run back against the grain underneath that whole mess. So, Owen, there were times, for instance, when I was playing, if a team would come out and press cover zero, I'd check into a man beater. And if it was press enough and I liked my matchup, I'd look to my fullback. We'd be on our own 30. And I'd look at Shane Haddix and I'd lean down and say, hey, make sure you grab it, Mike. Enjoy this. We got a touchdown. We're about to have a 70-yard touchdown. And he'd just say, okay, buddy. Because you could kind of tell pre snap alignment, they're screwed, right? From a
Yeah.
matchup standpoint, you're not stopping this. How many times did you look pre snap and think from a bounce standpoint when you're running the stretch play, you idiots? I mean, there's no way you're going to stop him from bouncing this thing. With his speed, all I got to do is secure that to this degree. You can't, by your alignment, I know he's going to bounce this thing and get big yards. How often did you see that before the ball was even snapped?
Pre-snap alignment was huge, you know what I mean? And just kind of thinking where he goes. Obviously, when the ball snap, all hell breaks loose, and then you got to like focus back up. But
Yeah.
I'll give an example, not so much on a bounce, but it was a bang play. It was the first play we ran against Georgia that Steve broke, and I absolutely whiffed on my block. Absolutely whiffed on it.
He
But the
gave you hell about
guy,
that. You're on the carpet, aren't you?
yeah, I'm on the carpet. So basically, I'm licking my chops. I'm like, holy gosh, we got a play here. Like, I'm going to blow this guy up. And Steve's going left or right, whatever he wants. And I mean, I just come out screaming and whiff. But that guy, that's what I'm saying. Georgia underestimated his speed so bad. Those linebackers just tried to play jump around games.
Oh,
Well,
wow.
he ends up jumping inside, and Steve just runs right by him.
They thought they could chase him down.
You know what I mean? So it's a completely terrible play by me. But I got, he ends up moving, trying to jump out of the play, thinking he can jump around me and just get the tackle. Like, there's no speed there. And they paid for it like every play during that game.
Well, I
They
asked
sure
you
did.
earlier, how many of the 3,923 yards could you account for? I just subtracted those 52 on that touchdown against Georgia. So now we're down to 3,871 yards that you might be able to make an argument for because you can't count those 52 as yours. But that's fun stuff, guys. That's yeah, we'll have to get him on here and you guys can tell war stories all the live long day. That's going to be great.
Yeah, absolutely. Another thanks to our friends at Toothman Ford. We all know cars cost less in Grafton. Big shout out to JR and everybody there at Team Toothman. No, oh, and listen, I know I've talked about this with you before, but I mean, you know, growing up, like you, Pat, and Steve were the holy trinity, right? I mean, I was that age when you're like in your late teens, right? I think that's the most pure fun time to be a sports fan. And what I mean by that is when you're 14, 15, 16, 17, you start to understand the games enough and realize what's going on enough that you can be invested in it and really live and die with it. And you're also still young enough that it's just pure. You know, you love the guys, you love the team, everything is fun. The bureaucracy of sports and all that hasn't beaten you down at that age. And man, like you for a lot of people my age, I was 14 when you guys, you know, beat Georgia in the Sugar Bowl. And that kind of launched an era that I think, you know, went all the way through Geno Smith and those guys and you know, at times Will Greer and those guys as well too, of just a fun era of WVU football. They weren't finishing in the top 10. We weren't finishing in the top 10 every year like you guys did for 3 years in a row, but it was just a fun era of WVU football where it felt like there was always somebody dynamic on offense. And you know what? To be fair, that probably started with Rasheed Marshall and Quincy Wilson, but really took off with you guys and then rolled into Geno and Stedman and Tavon and Will Greer and David Sills and Greg Jennings and all these different guys that we were, you know, just spoiled to watch and everything. And so, yeah, I mean, I was going to wear it today on the show, but I just wore it on the Rich Rodriguez episode a couple weeks ago. But I still got my Steve Slaton jersey, you know, from when I was 14 years old. And Jed mentions Pat, and he's right. It's a bylaw thing, and it is funny how you almost can't talk about one without talking about the other. But you know, that's the other jersey I got from my childhood right here. If you're watching on YouTube, I got the 5 as well too. I got a blue one and a gold one. Eli Manning's going to get into the NFL Hall of Fame this year. And his name is a part of that. The market that he played in is a part of that. And he was certainly a good quarterback. But the reason Eli's going to get in is because you can't tell the story of the NFL without Eli Manning. Point blank, period. You can't tell the story of the National Football League without getting to the 2 times that Eli beat Tom Brady in the Super Bowl, in particular that 18-0 New England Patriots team. That, to me, is the ultimate Hall of Fame criteria. That's why Pete Rose needs to be in the Baseball Hall of Fame. Barry Bonds needs to be in the Baseball Hall of Fame. You can't tell the stories of the sport without mentioning those guys. You cannot tell the story of college football without talking about Pat White. And it's not even just the innovative stuff that isn't exactly tangible that you can reach out and grab how much he changed the game, right? That stuff matters, but you can't tell the story of the sport without mentioning the first quarterback ever and the only quarterback ever to start and win 4 bowl games, 5 if we want to go to the Senior Bowl, because we always like to make that joke. And don't tell me Denard Robinson, because he was a wide receiver by the end of his senior year when Michigan won that bowl game. You can't tell the story of college football without Pat White. That's why he should be in. You can't tell the story of Steve Slaton, it feels like, without those two together. And this is just, it's an incredible moment. Owen, you kind of spoke on our Rich Rodriguez reaction about how the way that it ended for Rich here really sucked for all of you guys, because it felt like your era that was so successful got kind of pushed to the back, but because everything's kind of ugly with the head coach's departure, so we can't talk about, we can't celebrate, we can't welcome this era like we should have.
Yeah.
I think this is Rich getting hired, obviously, but this is another big part of this coming back around. I am so, the 14, 15, 16-year-old in me is giddy to see Steve getting this honor, what it means for you, what it means for Pat as being a big part of this. And it's awesome. It's effing awesome to have this all happening at the same time.
I'm jacked up, Wes.
Me too,
7
buddy.
Mountaineers in history. 7 Mountaineers in history.
You can still count them on your fingers. It's
remarkable.
It's absolutely remarkable. So a huge congratulations to Steve Slaton. Richly deserved. We are hoping to get him on here in the next week or so. Obviously, we'll keep you all posted on that. But that's the more and more I think about it, man, it's awesome because that era that did not get as much love and respect and honor as it deserved for the way that it ended. I think that's starting to come back around now, and I love to see that, especially for one beer truck that that sits on this podcast as well too. The beer truck on the panel here certainly deserves to be a part of all this as well.
Doesn't it feel like kismet on some level? Like Rich was just hired, and this is like on the heels of that.
Yeah,
and it almost feels like
it's good
there's
momentum.
a certain there's a certain element of kismet to it, right?
Yeah, it's definitely good momentum. It lets those kids even now that are getting back in, thinking about WVU. I mean, look, we got a guy who just got inducted into the Hall of Fame under this said ball coach who's coming back here to, what I mean? So, hard edge, baby, hard edge.
Gentlemen, we were going to talk about some portal stuff here in the open, but do we want to just take a break? Because I don't want to do a bigger segment here to start and then a 5-minute segment to end.
No, portal stuff is going to come in the main body, okay?
Yeah, but I know, but the rule
only thing
change.
I was going to mention here,
Wes, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, you've probably been made aware. It's not even a thorough conversation. It's just in the news, and I thought it's interesting. AFCA Coaches Convention just took place in Charlotte, January 12th, 14th. One of the things they did was all FBS coaches voted on a proposal to change the portal window. They want to go from 2 windows. They unanimously voted to eliminate the December and April 10 transfer portal windows in favor of a 10-day portal window from January 2nd to January 12th. They voted to do that as a proposal. That doesn't mean it will happen. It still has to go through the NCAA, through committee. Now, one of the things that Charlie Baker, president of the NCAA, said, he said, look, we'll sort out how this looks or how it works out. But remember, you still have to respect and adhere to the academic calendar. And this might be a hiccup in the academic calendar. Sure. Maybe it will, maybe it won't, but that's in the news. So pay attention. Yeah, it's not a long conversation we just have. People are talking about it. Pay attention over the course of this offseason. Right now, you obviously have the December window, which just closed, and you'll have another window opening in April. What they're saying is that's too much. It's unmanageable. It's untenable. We want to move to one window, preferably, by and large, after almost all the bowls are over, which January 2nd it would be, except for a playoff game or two. So you don't have this disaster we just worked through or try to navigate through in December with all these kids jumping into the portal before their bowl games. So I think if you streamline it that way, that will be good for college football, but you do have to figure out the calendar part of it with the academics and the enrollment. But that's big news that just took place in Charlotte at the coaches convention. So pay attention to that and what the NCAA does to handle that. So we'll see.
Certainly the portal and ever-evolving situation, I think, is probably the nicest way to label it, and we will continue to keep an eye on that, how those windows evolve and interchange potentially, and then obviously what that means for WVU. And with this edition of the portal class that we know is hot and heavy right now with a new coaching staff, we're going to take a break. We're going to get into some of the new commitments, some of the new faces in the portal and on the coaching staff as well, too. We'll do that when we return. You are in the gun. For nearly 20 years, Fortis has been the nation's leader in providing guaranteed roof performance programs for commercial buildings. Fortis offers roof performance solutions that feature extensive initial and ongoing reconditioning for commercial buildings as an alternative to traditional replacement, with long-term performance guarantees that are backed by global leader Lloyd's of London. Fortis offers a comprehensive range of roof performance management programs that provide financial security, extend the life of our customers' roofs, and make a significant impact on ROI. Fortis is currently improving performance and increasing ROI for customers at more than 4,800 locations, with more than 140 million square feet protected, including many Fortune 500 companies that have turned to Fortis to save money, gain financial certainty, and extend the life of their existing roofs. Fortis has helped customers save more than $520 million in capital roof replacement costs for an average ROI of over 250%. To learn more, visit fortis.us.com.
Fortis, roof performance and financial certainty guaranteed.
Nobody supports the blue and gold Mountaineers like Toothman Ford. With over 20 NIL deals and counting, Toothman Ford continues to rally behind our student athletes. And it's time we rally and support the dealer that supports the Mountaineers. Not only does Toothman Ford offer the best prices in the state on pre-owned, their never over MSRP campaign on new Fords guaranteed to save you thousands. Drive with pride all season long, knowing you're supporting the dealer that fuels our Mountaineers. Toothman Ford, where cars cost less, in Grafton and at toothmanford.com.
At Johnston Equipment, you'll find the area's best selection of Coyote tractors and loaders. Stop in and see all our compact equipment with multiple options available, including full cab, diesel, rubber tires, or track loaders. You'll find attachments and implements to get anything done, and low-rate financing options. Johnston Equipment has what you need to get the job done right. Come see the full line today at Johnston Equipment on Route 33 between Weston and Buchanan, or visit JohnstonEQ.com.
Back in the gun here as we roll along on this edition, episode 226 of ITG. Jed, I have a feeling this will probably be something we'll continue to do here over the next few weeks. What updates do we have? We've got a new GM for the football program. I believe a new coaching staff addition as well, too. Let's start there before we get into some of these portal guys.
Yeah, it's tapering down now. It will start to stabilize. We still have one or two that we may be talking about here in the next
coaches?
handful
You're
of days.
talking coaches here?
I'm talking players.
Okay.
Players, because again, the semester just started Monday, but technically you can still get kids in if you act quickly enough. But it's almost put to bed until the April window, but you may still have. Just stay tuned on one or two. Okay, that's what I'll say, and not take any further than that. But on the coaching front, of course, we had friend of the program on in the past last year. It was a popular guest, Drew Fabianich, longtime NFL scout. He was our general manager. He came from Auburn. Well, Drew's no longer part of the staff. We brought in a new general manager. And what's interesting about this, when you look at Chuck Lilly, the general manager we're bringing in from Oklahoma, who was on the personnel staff with Brent Venables and crew and Norman. Here's what Mountaineer fans can know about Chuck Lilly. First of all, he's a very self-made kid. I call him a kid because to me, he is a kid, right? This young man is self-made. He was a junior at Clemson, had no background in football in terms of coaching at the next level, and wrote an email to the Clemson football staff, didn't get a response. So he just showed up in the building one day, and he heard noise up on the second level. And so he just migrated up to the second level and said, "Hey, what's up? I'm here looking for a job." Well, wouldn't you know it, someone in the personnel department is who met him and said, "Tell you what, give me 10 hours a week. I'm not going to pay you, but I'll take some free work." Next thing you know, he's a student assistant, 10 hours a week, working with the personnel department, works his way into a more permanent role on the staff because of that. After Clemson, literally didn't have time to have a cup of coffee at Western Carolina before Kansas State called him. Now, this wasn't long after Chris Kleiman took the K-State job. It might have been his second year. I'm trying to remember the timeline. So K-State reaches out and says, "Hey, I've got a pretty chunky staff position for you here in my personnel department, and here's what we're doing." So he ends up in Manhattan in the Little Apple with Chris Kleiman, was part of some big things with what the Wildcats accomplished, and he was there for 4 years. Very productive, started to develop a name for himself as an up-and-comer in the business, a rising star on the personnel side of things. So he ends up, after K-State, getting an offer from Brent Venables. Again, all roads lead to Clemson to some extent, right? It's amazing how these things happen. When you have a program for a handful of years just explode and flourish, so many things can be traced back to that program during that run. And that's true of Clemson. And credit to Dabo and the job he's done there. So he ends up with Brent Venables, of course, the former Clemson defensive coordinator, on staff, assisting the general manager at Oklahoma. Curtis Lofton was on that staff, a former player. He was working with him. So he was evaluating talent, watching tape, and in large measure, the staff was kind of dependent on his evaluation. They trusted his evaluations. Now, I was kind of under the impression, I don't know if he was actually pulling the trigger on personnel deals, NIL deals, like making financial offers. I'm not sure the extent to which he did that at Oklahoma, but he was definitely part of those conversations. So the next logical step for him would be, how about your own personnel department? So Zach Alley, the Oklahoma connection, worked with him out there, recognized what an impressive guy Chuck Lilly is. So the next thing you know, we got Chuck Lilly in here. He was in here before it was formally announced. But so he's been playing a prominent part in this flurry of talent that we've been signing since you recognize that it would all happen in a hurry with the late start. First of all, the timing of Rich being hired, we got a late start to addressing things in the portal. We lost some kids in the portal, which is bound to happen through attrition. So it was bound to come in these chunks and these bunches. But it's nice to know that you got a guy like that and a staff working on evaluating talent with each of these kids that we're about to bring in and talk about. And once again, speaking of Oklahoma, let's stick to that, Owen. We hired a Nichols and Sam's coach. He was a defensive analyst on Brent Venable's staff, Henry Weinreich at Oklahoma. Previously, he was at Jack State. What I like about this is he's very familiar with how Zach Alley goes about his business. He's very familiar with Zach Alley's scheme. He's one of these guys that finishes the sentences Zach Alley starts. So it's nice to have a handful of those guys populating the defensive staff that really understand how Zach Alley likes to work. So he will be coaching that nickel slash Sam's position. And what we mean by that is, if you can just visualize, to the wide side of the field, typically, to the strong side of the field, which is so often the wide side. In a traditional defense, you would have a Sam linebacker. But now in this era of hybrid players, you might have a nickel back, whether it's a heavy nickel or not. So you have some combination of hybrid players slash nickelback slash Sam linebackers. He'll be responsible for those players, which are a critical part of the construct of this defense. Now, what's interesting to me, guys, when I look at Henry Weinreich, I'm looking. He's a Rhodes graduate with a chemistry degree. We talked earlier
I saw
in the Zach
thing.
Alley episode. Zach Alley, like, legit either got a 32 or a 34 on his ACT. So he's a legit genius. Zach Alley is, right? And now you got Henry Weinreich, a chemistry major.
Dude was playing college football, playing linebacker, and getting a chemistry degree at the same time.
I mean, look, we might beat your butt on the gridiron between the lines and then beat you in a game of chess in the locker room afterwards. I'm like, this is pretty impressive. We got a high IQ on that defensive staff.
That's funny, Jed. I noticed that too. When I saw chemistry degree, I was like, wait a second, what?
I want to imagine Castile sitting in there listening to these conversations, like,
oh man,
because he's such a Jeff Castile is the guy that you can just imagine sitting on the back porch of any cabin in Appalachia, whittling wood, and he's the smartest guy in 6 counties, right? But and it's just so fun to imagine, to compare and contrast the different types of intelligence that are populating that room. It's because I think Jeff Castillo is one of the smartest defensive guys that's ever called a defense or hung a whistle around his neck. And to put him in the room with these young geniuses, it's just fascinating, isn't it?
Oh man, I mean, I think what's going on right now is a big change up for everybody. As far as the fan base goes, I mean, there's a lot of moving parts. But as you just described there, kind of already have some cohesiveness going in to this thing. So there's going to be lingo that's shared, and have already somewhat of that connection, which you kind of want with the staff, not just a bunch of random dudes getting put together. So you see the cohesion that's happening, and it's hard not to get a little fired up, man. I mean, it's you're getting the band back together and you're getting some extras. You're getting a little more hairspray this time.
Yes. And if you read the code, part of what you can do if you want to see the relative value somebody confers, listen to what Oklahoma is saying when they lose somebody. Okay. So what I did was I did a deep dive into their podcasts and their media and all this. And I was going back 5 years listening to the Cade State stuff, talking about Chuck Lilly before he went to Oklahoma. And the Oklahoma people, it almost sounds like they recognized he was an up and comer and they already lost Zach Alley. So they're dealing with that. They lost him to little old West Virginia. Well, now it feels like they're trying to talk themselves into, okay, the Zach Alley or Chuck Lilly, he's not as big of a hit. We can kind of probably sort of overcome it, but it feels like therapy, group therapy. When you listen to like their media, it's like they're trying to convince themselves this isn't. They know it's a big loss, and it is a big loss, and it's a big addition for West Virginia. But I think they thought very highly of Chuck Lilly and Henry Weinreich at Oklahoma.
Well, good, you big jerks. A big thank you to our friends at Fortis. They are not jerks. Our guy Rick Lewis, he's a very nice man. He actually,
TJ Simmons.
Jed and I had a fun little wager with Rick, and I actually won a Starbucks gift card. So how about that? A big shout out to everybody at Fortis for roof performance and financial certainty guaranteed. You got to visit fortis.us.com. Okay, Jed. Well, that's it for the GM/coaching staff moving and shaking. I know we've got some updates on the portal front as well, too.
Yeah, it's what we try and do with this, Wes. This is about as much as you can streamline it. We kind of look at what's happened in the portal since we last aired, which was last week. And I mean, at some point, we'll probably do a collective view of the entire portal class. It'd be a good idea to do that. But what we're trying to do in the meantime is within a handful of days, address each new addition as they come in. So let's talk about the kids that since we last met and last convened on ITG have been added. Max Brown, quarterback from Charlotte. Some people thought that was a curious move. Well, hey, you already got three quarterbacks with a fourth coming. Well, you can never have enough. You never know about injuries. You never know about health. So here's what Max Brown's going to bring transferring in from Charlotte. First of all, he spent a year with the Florida Gators prior to that. He's from Tulsa, Oklahoma, but he spent 1 year with the Gators, and at the end of that swoon 2 years ago, when they dropped five straight to end the season, they inserted him against Florida State. Matter of fact, I think he even started the game to try and get a spark. He played well in that game, but not well enough. And even last year at Charlotte, he was in such a wretched offensive ecosystem. It's tough to judge him, and his numbers reflected that. But he's a kid who, at his best, he can sling it. He's athletic. He can move around. A guy with some experience and some size, 230 pounds, 6'3". So he'll step into the room. And we got the milk truck back in the room. Big O, I just looked up.
He was
photobombing.
And then sticking on the offensive side, Owen chime in about Ty Edwards. This is a big kid. So when you're losing a big kid in CJ, you want to address this. What's interesting about Ty Edwards, remember when we did the show last month when the quarterback from Vandy had the case against the NCAA with the junior college status? Yes.
Yep.
My
does
junior
that count?
college
Does that count as a year of eligibility?
Should
that count as a year of eligibility? Yeah.
Well, that changed a lot of lives. Case in point right here, Ty Edwards thought his career was over. But when the ruling went in favor of Pavia and said your junior college years didn't count towards your eligibility, all of a sudden Ty Edwards had more eligibility. So he enters the portal. And he finished strong at Northern Iowa. I went back and watched some tape on this kid, and he's fun to watch. He does have size. He uses that size. I watched him against North Dakota State, which is a defensive football team I have a ton of respect for. He was very physical, making plays against them. He had a lot of production in his time at Northern Iowa. 1,500 plus yards, 11 touchdowns last year, went over 1,000. He spent 2 years at the junior college level, ran for over 1,000 yards there, double-digit touchdowns. He was a junior college All-American. He was a national champion at Hutchinson Community College. Even spent a year at Georgia Military. He recognized, hey, all of a sudden I have eligibility. I'm going to come in and try and do a little something with that. He enters the portal. West Virginia makes him an offer, like what they saw. He finished strong. I think it was the Indiana State game, his last regular season game last year. Ran for 229 yards. So a really productive kid. Played high school basketball. He's athletic for a guy his size, moves well, but he uses that weight, Owen. Good pad level. He runs in a very physical nature, but 6'4", 230 plus pounds. It's going to be fun to see, even in one off season, in the span of 6-8 months. What can Mike Joseph and our nutrition staff do with the frame and the body composition of a guy like that, even if it's just 6 or 8 months?
Yeah, I mean, 6'4", 230 is quite a load. So it would be really interesting to see. I mean, hey, I've seen Mike Joseph turn some flub into some flub and chub and some hard ass chiseled rock, dude. I'm telling you right now, he'll get them right. He'll get them right.
Yeah,
That's for sure.
and
And it's
and
so
oh,
crazy now that we talk about nutrition, and I talk about nutrition all the time because it's funny to me because it's always been important, but now it's really become prominent. Like when you go into a place, they have a nutrition center, like
oh
where
yeah,
you can get protein shakes and make your own proteins, frozen berries and milks and yogurts and whatever and oats and all sorts of crazy things just for after workout drinks, and then the nutrition as far as what they have the training table in the facility. It's its own contained unit. You're right. Most of the students are eating down at the towers, and these football players are getting these nutritious, delicious meals prepared in house, and how much that all collaborates now with hey, this guy needs to gain some weight, what I mean, put him on this diet, put him on these
yes.
foods. It's the science behind um that entire piece, and you're able to see those transformations in that 6 month span.
I mean, every calorie is charted. I mean, Haley's the head nutritionist. She has a staff. She's a department head, and it's not like you just willy nilly guess. Hey, what's up on the training table today? I'll throw pizza up there. Who cares? No, I mean everything is thoughtful. There's a reason for it. Uh, Things are uniquely carved out. She's in constant communication with the players. Hey, you need to eat a little more of this type of thing. Here's a list of 5 things you can choose from if you go to Kroger. A little less of this type of thing. Here, you have a different issue than that guy has. Here's what I want you doing. So it's much different. And so again, that's going to play a role when you look, even since we last talked, Wes, 4 additions on the offensive line.
I was going
And
to
you
say I'm
talk about training
excited about
table.
these.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you have a transfer from Youngstown State, who's a local kid in Wyatt Minor, who played at RCB, kid with a big frame, 6'5", 315. See what you can do with him. Just recently committed. You have a transfer from LSU who actually went both ways. He was 3 years on the offensive line, spent this past season on the defensive line. It's looking like he will be a piece of our offensive line. He's a battle-tested guy. He's played a lot of football. Uh, at LSU, he played 9 games. He had 60 plus snaps, but he was around a lot of high level football, learning from good people. He's a Florida kid. When he was coming out, a very coveted kid. His nickname's Toa. Number 27 O lineman in the class coming out in 2021. And then if you want to move on to Robbie Martin, that's a name for major West Virginia fans. He's a Huntington kid. We made a run at him first time around in recruiting, lost out to Gibby at NC State. Gibby was pushing hard for the hoop to land him and did in the 11th hour. And so when he entered the portal at NC State, because he spent 1 year there, didn't play, you kind of thought, man, Gibby's going to be right here in the mix again. This is a Huntington kid, and Gibby's the reason he was at NC State. So we're bringing him in, and he's a very talented kid with a lot of potential. He had a lot of offers once he entered the portal. People recognized his body and his capabilities and his skill set. And then finally, you got a kid that came from Arkansas, had committed to UCLA, and we kind of had to flip him once he entered the portal. He's played 5 years of college football. He spent 1 year at Charlotte, his first year coming out of high school, where he played in 6 games, 3 as a starter in Charlotte. All of those snaps at Charlotte were at right tackle. Then he transferred to Arkansas. Played a lot of football for them, had 6 starts. He played both guard and tackle. And I went back and watched some of his Arkansas tape, and then I was listening to some of what Coach Pittman had to say about him. And they went back and forth because of his versatility and his skill set. He's a guy with a lot of size, big frame, 6'5", 320 plus pounds. Uh, but he has the feet to play guard, but he has the feet and physicality to play tackle. So I mean, I could see him ending up, depending on what our needs might be, as a tackle at West Virginia. But that's rounding out what it looked like on the offensive side of the football, and then we can dive into some of the defensive guys and wrap things up.
We sure can. But first, let's give a thanks to our friends at Johnston Equipment. If I can get my computer to load my handy dandy read for me here. We know at Johnston Equipment you can get 0% financing for 72 months plus a free loader on select Coyote models in stock. You got to visit Johnston Equipment. between Weston and Buchanan on Route 33. All right, Jed, defensive side of the football for portal updates here.
Yeah, these once again are the guys that kind of sort of happened since we last aired, or at least maybe they happened around the time we aired, but we would have a chance to talk about them because we hadn't been alerted to it yet. Let's start with Braden Siders, defensive end and edge guy from Wyoming, 6'3", 250 plus pounds, incredibly productive. 4 years at Wyoming, redshirted and played 3 of those years. 23 and a half TFLs, 14 and a half sacks in 33 games for the Cowboys at Wyoming. Remember when they upset in Laramie last year? Texas Tech went up in the opener up into the mountains of Wyoming, got upset by them. He had a sack in that game. He played an instrumental role there. He's a Colorado kid. Guys, I think he's going to provide instant help. I'd be very surprised if he doesn't end up being a starter, or at least a guy who contributes in a major way. He's just built and tailor-made for that. Very productive kid. He does look like the type of kid, Owen, with a hard edge. And speaking of hard edge, we got a linebacker from Colorado State and Chase Wilson, 6'1", 230 pounds, that recently committed. Last 3 years, 230 plus tackles, half a dozen sacks. Number 3 in the Mountain West a couple years ago with 107 sacks, averaged almost 9 a game, or 107 tackles, I should say, averaged almost 9 a game. Guys, in the last 2 years, he just has a nose for the football. 10 times in the last 2 years, double-digit sacks for Colorado State. He's a very fiery kid. He finds his way for the football. He has a nose for it, and he's going to ignite that defensive huddle, which is exactly what you want from a linebacker. You want that infectious personality with that infectious attitude that just has only one gear, and that's 100 miles per hour. That's what Chase Wilson is. I think he's going to fit right in. I can't even imagine what it's going to be like with him and Eddie V in the same huddle. I mean, that's the kind of energy that you want in your defensive huddle. And then if you want to jump to the back end, a very productive corner in Derek Carter, who played at Jack State, 5'11", buck 85, played at Jack State for Rich, posted almost 60 tackles, nose for the football when it's in the air. All the things we used to say about Beanie, 9 PBUs. He picked off a pass over the last 3 years, just consistent production. 2 years ago, he had 8 pass breakups. So when it's in the air, he's very comfortable. He doesn't freak out. He's cool hand Luke when the football's coming his way. 4 years at Jack State, included a red shirt. He was a corner, but he's versatile enough that maybe he ends up playing some safety as well. Another intriguing thing about him, we talked when Goose Crowder was here, the quarterback from Gardendale High School in Alabama. Gardendale's coached by a former teammate of mine at Samford and Chad Eads. And Derek Carter played with Goose Carter for Chad Eads at Gardendale. So that's kind of neat little connection there. And sticking to the corner room, we got a big one at Devontae Golden Nelson from Akron. This is a guy who in 3 years at Akron had 10 passes defended, picked off a couple balls, played in 4 years in 4 games in 2 years at Memphis before transferring to Akron. But when you look at Akron, he played a lot of football, over 600 snaps just last year, over 1,000 during his time at Akron. He's a Tennessee kid. He's an academic all-MAC kid. So again, that speaks to his intelligence. That's the kind of thing that I could see him getting in a room with Zach Alley. And once they start comparing notes and scouting and game planning, that's going to serve us very, very well. I think he's the type of kid who could push to be a starting corner for us at that field corner spot. When you think in terms of the wide side of the field, the short side of the field, he spent most of the time at Akron playing that wide side. And if you want to look to a short side option, that's your Michael Coates, probably the Nevada kid.
I'm excited about this guy.
Yeah, 5'10", buck 73, but he's twitchy. He plays above his size. He was an all-Mountain West kid, number 2 nationally in passes defender. Remember 2 years ago, all those conversations we had about Beanie Bishop and his knack for making plays with the ball in flight. You can never have enough of that defensively. Never. He had 17 passes defended last year for Nevada. He had 5 in one game, a win over Oregon State. So this is a kid with a knack for making plays with the ball in flight. 4 interceptions at Nevada. So again, another kid that I would expect to push for a starting role. And if not, just contribute in some major way, but more of a boundary type. And when you're playing the boundary, much like Beanie Bishop did, that's where a lot of the action takes place because it's a shorter throw, so you're going to be targeted more. So you're going to have lots of opportunities there. And then a lot of people are excited about Justin Harrington because this is a big-bodied safety who people don't entirely know what to expect of this kid. He was a very highly coveted kid coming out, a 4-star coming out of high school when he signed with Oklahoma, spent 3 years at Oklahoma, but more recently played 1 year for the Washington Huskies. He's 6'3", 213 pounds or so, long frame. He's a North Carolina kid. So we've kind of benefited from him coming back to this part of the country to close out his career. I mean, what I might see him as out of the gates, he might project his body type. First of all, he might be big enough to be a Will backer. But I could also see him projecting as that nickel Sam type that we talked about, that hybrid type guy that's going to very often play to the wide side of the field. Will Davis, Virginia Union, small college safety. What I like about him, played a lot of football with a lot of production. 25 TFLs at Virginia Union, 9 interceptions. 9 interceptions. So talk about making plays with the ball in flight, 2 forced fumbles. He was kind of a turnover machine for Virginia Union at a small college level. And then let's close with this. Fred Perry, the safety from Jacksonville State. 3 years at Jack State playing, almost 260 tackles, 18 tackles for loss, 10 passes defended. Here's the big one, guys. 6 forced fumbles. And when you watch the tape, it makes perfect sense how that happens. All right. One of the staff members told me when I first talked to him about Fred Perry, they said, Jed, buckle up because you're not going to get through next year as the sideline reporter without at least one time being hit by Fred Perry. He throws his body around so much and he's so reckless and he's so physical. Oh, and you know the comp that I heard made? Charles Pugh. He's a Charles Pugh type kid. I mean, we were going back through some of the body types, some of the types of kids that he might compare to. Like, I'm not going to say he's Carl Joseph, neither did this coach, but they said, yeah, you're in the right conversation. You're in the right conversation. Just a very physical kid. He begged the staff to be on kickoff team, but they're like, I'm not so sure. He might end up with a targeting call on kickoff, screaming downhill and laying somebody out on kickoff. So he ended up not playing there. But he is another kid that will probably populate that nickel / Sam type position over the slot to the wide side of the field. But it's fun to see some of these pieces start to come together. I mean, what are we up to? 26, 28 pieces now in the portal. That's wave 1. There'll be another major wave coming in April. Remember, last year, Rich at Jack State added 60 kids in the offseason and added 40 kids in the summer. So that April window is going to be a critical piece to what we're building moving forward as we try and put this thing together moving into the fall. Interesting story, guys. And I'll toss back to you with this. It made me really think about some things in the modern era of college football. A buddy of mine that played at Virginia Tech, I was just with him recently, and we were having a conversation. He said, there's a big booster that comes back around to Blacksburg and speaks at different functions, and he's not afraid to say anything, and he'll speak his mind. He said, hey, he's kind of the guy that will say all the things I'm thinking, but I'm afraid to say. And so he said, we were together at a function, and he's speaking to these boosters, and he said, hey, you guys are disappointed because, Virginia Tech had a 500 season. He had all this hype and all this hope. He said, wait, let me ask you something. What was all that hype and all that hope based on? And they're like, well, we had 21 starters returning. He said, exactly. You know what that means in the modern era of college football? Nobody else wanted them. He said, that used to be really good news. He said, but all that means now is nobody else was willing to pay him more than what you're paying him. He said, that's the old way of looking at good news, right? I was like, that. There's a lot of merit to that. There's a lot of merit to that.
There's a lot of merit to that. If you're not going to the if you're not going to the NFL, or somebody isn't offering you a huge bag, maybe you just
better have a really fortified collective situation with your trust. If it's good news to have 21 starters, because even Ohio State can't afford 21 starters that they want, right? So good point.
Oh, fantastic. Fantastic. Well, this was a lot of fun, this episode. Another huge, massive congratulations to Steve Slaton and a well-deserved honor of becoming the 7th Mountaineer to go into the College Football Hall of Fame. He's gonna, like I said, he's gonna have to wait a little bit, but it's gonna be well worth the wait for sure. We will keep you updated for when we're gonna get Steve in here. Make sure you're following us on Twitter at In the Gun Podcast. We'll obviously be keeping updates there. Subscribe on our YouTube channel at In the Gun Podcast here. That way, whenever we do have Steve, you'll get it right to you. And obviously, we'll continue moving and shaking and updating as we roll along here. Final touches on the coaching staff and the portal.
I'll say this. We're not a breaking news site. That's not what we do. But those that are breaking news sites, you might want to start, at least maybe before this post, start paying attention to what they have to say as things start to leak out, because there will be some things coming here that are worth them breaking. I'm just not going to sit here and tell you what it is. That's not what we do. But
he's going to tell us. He's going to tell Owen and I as soon as we go to break here in about 30 seconds.
Probably, maybe even by the time we post, I will see. But yeah, whoever you listen to for your news and your breaking news and your inside information, well, you might want to listen to them here in the next day or two, because they'll have some news for you. But anyway,
or if you want to hear it from Jed, for just $9.99 a month, onlyfans.com /signal caller. $9.99 a month. You can get all the news right from the signal caller himself.
There you go.
Oh, I tell you what, fellas, it's been a lot of fun. Great episode. Big shout out to Super Steve once again. And the one thing that he would want you to do is be an ear and tell an ear about your new favorite WVU football podcast. For Skylar Callahan, the Beer Truck Big O, the signal caller Jed Drenning, I'm Wes Schuler. Thanks so much for listening, everybody. Take care. We will talk to you soon. You've been In the Gun.
ITG.
The fun doesn't have to stop here.
Be sure to hit subscribe and never miss an episode.
If you have any questions, suggestions, or feedback,
be sure to follow us on X at In the Gun Podcast.
Join us again next time.
Until then,
tell an ear to tell an ear about your new favorite WVU football podcast.
This mission is over. It's over.